Welcome to GVN Talking Comics Interview. On today's show, we welcome talented artists Phillip Boutte Jr. and Mike Uwandi. Phillip and Mike are two of the founding members of the 9B Collective, the first Black-owned concept art studio made up primarily of BIPOC artists. Along with fellow founder Aldis Hodge, the 9B Collective has worked on feature films, animation, television, video games, graphic design and more. Now, here's your host, Martin Sexton.
Welcome to another edition of GVN Talking Comics Interview. I am your host, Martin, and today I have the pleasure of speaking to two of the founding members of the 9B Collective, Phillip Boutte Jr. and Mike Uwandi. Phillip and Mike, along with actor Aldis Hodge, have combined to create the 9B Collective, one of the premier concept art studios in the business, doing work for Marvel, Paramount, Netflix, and much more. So let's welcome talented artists and entrepreneurs, Phillip Boutte Jr. and Mike Uwandi to GVN's Talking Comics. Thanks for giving us a bit of your valuable time today, guys. How are we doing today?
Great.
Excellent. Okay, so since this is the first time I've had the pleasure of talking to the both of you, I want to delve into a little bit of your artistic beginnings, and I'm going to start with you, Phillip. When did you first take an interest in art, and whose work kind of inspired you to believe that it's something you could attain to?
I think I've been drawing since I was like 3. So I think it was always just like I was into comic books really early on and like Saturday morning cartoons and watching anime and stuff like that. So I kind of my curiosity sparked early there. And then from there, I kind of moved into looking into films. And so like watching films like Neverending Story and Willow and, Flight of the Navigator, like all of those old kind of films, that's what kind of sparked me to think bigger and start to use my imagination, Dark Crystal, all of those types of things. And then Spielberg movies like Goonies and, those types of things. I think that was like what really kind of drew me to drawing, basically.
Well, I know when everyone says that those old movies, I'm thinking, those aren't old. Those. Okay, same question for you, Mike. What got you interested in going into art?
Yeah, so similar to Phil, I've been drawing since I was like 3 years old. But I was definitely into like Sonic and Ninja Turtles and stuff like that. But then eventually my neighbor got me into anime and this game called Final Fantasy. And there was this artist named Yoshitaka Anamo who had this really beautiful, like illustrative style that I just was like in awe about. And so similar to him, it kind of like expanded my world as to what that stuff could look like. So yeah, it kind of eventually just went into video games rather than like film for me.
All right. So I noticed that you both work digitally. Was that always the case? I mean, did you start out in the more traditional form? And what made you end up going toward the digital workflow?
Digital just became my necessity of like technology and just the times, right? Like, so I know for me, I know we both did. We started traditionally like doing like, I had a traditional just background. So it was like pen and paper, charcoal, gouache, watercolor, oil, acrylics, like just learning all the basics of art and how to produce art and how to make it. And then I think only until my last semester in college at Cal State Long Beach did I learn Photoshop. So it was like right at the cutting edge of that. And so trying to kind of figure out how to kind of take my artwork from paper to digital was a difficult process. But then once I got into it, I loved it. It's just by nature of the business in terms of being able to make changes quickly and then using the tools to kind of make sure that you're on the cutting edge of technology.
Okay. Again, same with you, Mike. Did you start out with a traditional form of art?
Yeah, definitely. I started off traditionally, and in college, I always tried to dabble in it, but it was just so painful for me because I was like, how do you draw like looking at something, but you're not looking at the actual tablet you're drawing on? I felt like that was so weird. So eventually, and still to this day, I don't really know how to draw on a tablet, but I do know how to use a Cintiq. And it sucked because it was so expensive to get a Cintiq. So be really bad at my job for a long time, basically.
That was a great segue because I was getting ready to talk about that, because I know that, in the time where you've talked to young artists, they might have asked you what equipment that you use. And I went the same way. I went from the tablet where I had to stare at the screen and draw on the tablet. That does not work for me. But again, I couldn't afford the Cintiq, so like I used like a 19-inch Huion, which was a whole lot cheaper, but works just as well, at least for me. So what do you recommend to young people who ask you what they should be using?
I mean, I think like if you're just starting out, I think before you do anything digitally, you really should learn to draw on paper. So just taking your sketchbook with you, paper, pencil, pen, whatever it is that you want, just mark making, I think is important. You can always graduate to using like an iPad with an iPencil and using something like Procreate, which is really great. Because it allows you to still be on the go. It allows you to, show your portfolio on it. And then also it allows you to draw and paint. And then from there, I think it's moving into, programs like Photoshop, and making sure that you have a basis for that. You can even go into 3D and digital with like programs like ZBrush or Marvelous Designer or Dash 3D. And I think that tools wise, just starting out with a basic tablet is fine. It's going to be one of the expensive ones. But I think, for both me and Mike, we both kind of settled our love on Cintiq because it allows us to draw directly on a screen right in front of us and do what we need to do.
Right. So and that's actually why I went to the Huion, because that was the first one that allowed me to do that, because like I said, I couldn't coordinate at all. Okay. So Mike, I'm going to start with you on this one. What was your first professional employment in art, and how long did you feel like as you got started that you started to feel more settled in and not worried about what you were producing?
Oh man. So I think my very first job was this company that is now defunct called Red 5. They essentially was making a first-person anime style shooter, similar to that Blizzard game. I can't remember what it's called. Overwatch. Very similar to Overwatch, well before Overwatch. And eventually, I was just doing like icons, which was not fun at all. It was really painful. And then I then moved to like doing commercials and things like that, like for Mr. Clean and stuff like that. Definitely not the like most glamorous beginnings. But to be honest, I didn't really feel like I actually got to a point where I, felt like, like I made it, so to speak, until like, I guess this year. It was like someone said, "Hey, you made it." And I was like, "Oh, I guess I did, huh?" But it never feels that way. So yeah, I'll continue to just feel like I did.
Okay, how about you, Phillip?
I don't know. I think I think it was like, especially the start of an artist is like, you're trying to just figure out how to survive, right? So it's like, I remember doing the jobs where it's like, it would be like some random person would be like, "Oh, I have a friend that's trying to start a t-shirt line and they need stuff that looks like Harley Davidson stuff." And then it moved into like, "Oh, I've got a friend of a friend that's starting a barbershop and they need a logo," like that type of deal. And then it moved from, or someone would be like, "Can you draw my tattoo?" It starts there. And then it moves into then like getting clients where it's like, "Okay, I have something for a book or something publication wise." And then moving into knowing that I wanted to draw characters, it moved into me trying to draw my own characters and kind of foster that, and then led to, eventually finding the Costume Designers Guild and then working with costume designers to do characters. So it was a big process. I production designed for a long time. So I was drawing sets and I was coming up with ideas for music videos. So the process is wide, but I think the key thing is the component to it was being consistent and then trying to make sure that your skills were up to par so that you could deliver no matter what was thrown at you.
Excellent. Okay, so you got so when did you and you get myself straight here, you, Mike, and Aldis decide to get together to form the 9B Collective?
That was back in 2020. So we were at a drink and draw for the Concept Art Association. It was sponsored by us and them. And it was themed Afrofuturism, Afropunk, right? So it was for Black History Month 2020. We put it together, had a whole big turnout. It was amazing. And we noticed that was just me and Mike. So we noticed that there was a discrepancy, at least in terms of like all these Black artists specifically all in one place, all working across different platforms. So animation, video games, live action, producers, directors, you name it, like just professionals, right? And all kind of knowing of each other, but never have been in the same place at the same time. Like, so we internet friends, or we know someone's work, but it's like, I work in live action, they work in video games. We never, commingle. And long story short, that got to a point where we're looking and we're talking to people and getting to know them about their careers and stuff. And the similar theme just seemed to be, no matter who it was, the main theme was either this feeling of isolation, like being the only one or the only one that looks like them in their work group, or they worked at a company that had hundreds of employees, at which point there are only hundreds of employees. Hold on, sorry. That's okay. Thank you. Hundreds of employees, tons of I guess only a few minorities. So maybe like there's like 2 Black people that work at a company of 400 people, and they never get to work together and they're never on the same project. So because of that, that ended up being a problem where we're like, okay, this is an issue. You shouldn't feel that kind of isolation. I looked at my own career, and that's when the kind of like clicked, where it was like, I had been working in costume and character since 2007. And the first time that I personally sat next to another Black artist doing my same job was 2019. So that was a long period of time to be isolated. And so between talking to Mike and then him having similar situations and him coming into live action with me, and he had been doing video games and animation, which I was not doing. And then we were talking about the education pipeline, about building up artists, and then talking to Aldis. I've known Aldis since he was like around 12, because we were both actors. Or I was a child actor. Aldis is now obviously an actor. So he does a lot of art. So he just understood what we were trying to do, and he wanted to be a part of it. So that's why we all kind of like formed together, because right after that, in February of 2020, we had quarantine. So that's right. March of 2020, everything shut down. There was no avenues for kind of building this community that we wanted to build. Then by the time you got to George Floyd and all of those things, it really just made us think bigger, and we thought about opening it up to the world.
Excellent. I didn't realize Aldis was a painter until I was doing research for this interview,
yes.
which I thought was great. What kind of paintings does he do?
Lots of fine art. So he'll do pieces about socioeconomic issues or systemic racism, or thinking about like think pieces, things that like you look at and they make you think. And he's exhibited in the LA Art Show and a few other places. So he'll do big think pieces. He's also a horologist, so he makes watches.
Yes, I had to look that up. When they started saying he was a horologist, I say, what is that?
Yeah.
So I had to look and say, oh, he does watches. Okay, that's cool. All right.
Very artistic gentleman. So he understands exactly what we're doing.
Very good.
Basically a Renaissance man.
Okay, so now, between you and Mike, you guys done a whole bunch of impressive projects. And the best I can tell, you obviously said, okay, what would Martin Sexton like? Because you did a bunch of whole Star Trek stuff and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and all that stuff's just right up my alley. So which is, you may notice on my background, I got the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. thing. But as far as getting the opportunities to get your foot in the door to do these kinds of projects, what did that require?
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I think for me, it was kind of weird, because I think since I worked in games, there's always like this Marvel game or this Star Wars game and stuff like that. And I was doing a few of those. So I already had like a lot of familiarity with that world and those characters, as well as, of course, like comic books and stuff like that. And then it just ended up meeting the right people, but acclimating my style to what was needed. And so once the 2 and 2 kind of mixed up, they were like, oh, well, why don't you just work for Marvel? Hey, why don't you help me on Star Trek and stuff like that? So it actually like kind of worked out in the right way for me, at least, where I kind of like built up to it rather than just like getting dumped right in there.
Excellent. Okay. I would be remiss, Philip, if I didn't mention the fact that you have worked with Ruth Carter, of course, 2-time Academy Award winner now. So what were your collaborations with Ruth like, and how exactly did that workflow go? That she would give you a design and then you would put it on paper? How exactly did that work?
It's a really collaborative, like with Ruth, I worked with her a couple of times before Black Panther, just on like some smaller projects where she was developing some stuff. And then she contacted me for Black Panther during her interview, because she knows that I'm a nerd and I just know that stuff. So we had a really good conversation about Black Panther and about like what it stood for and like all the correlations, like different things, like, Mansa Musa and vibranium being gold, like all of that stuff. We talked about all those things and we just really had a great conversation. And then she went and had her interview and she booked it and she hired me. Like she was just like, we need to do this together. It was awesome. And so I spent a lot of time just going back and forth, and she's very knowledgeable about not only costume, but research. Like she does a lot of research. So she was very knowledgeable about different African tribes, what their stuff meant. She's like a historian. So I got to learn a lot from her, just from her design kind of knowledge and her background and kind of like character. And so on the first one, I was in her department, on Black Panther, we're in her department, and we just drew stuff. And the way that process works is it's highly collaborative. Like she'll come up with an idea, she gives it to me, I'm fleshing it out and drawing. And then sometimes it's vice versa, where it's like I might have something and give it back, but it's a whole design process, right? It's very collaborative. On Wakanda Forever, I actually worked for Marvel VizDev. So I was in the visual development department under Ryan Meinerding. But me and Ruth are good friends, so we would always trade things back and forth and talk to each other. So it was kind of like a good balance. She's just very creative and very supportive. But also, obviously, as a 2-time Oscar winner, she knows her stuff. And she's willing to share. So she's a very collaborative department head.
I mean, that's the impressive thing. Even, as you said, now she's won her 2 awards, but she's still, the back and forth doesn't bother her. Some people, their egos get in the way, but that's obviously not Ruth.
She's very collaborative, and she's also really supportive, and she wants to make sure that everyone's given credit for what they do in the process of like the team, right? She's very team oriented.
Excellent. Okay, so now, Philip, when I first hooked up with you on LinkedIn, I had mentioned to you that the Today Show segment was the first time I had been introduced to you. And I said the one thing that really, besides the work, which was fabulous, but what really impressed me was when you said toward the end about looking for people's potential as opposed to maybe their experience, which I think is a great idea, because I can remember even when I was a kid and getting into people leaving college, they couldn't get a job because they said, okay, you need to have experience. Well, how can I get experience if you don't give me a chance to do it? So tell me a little bit about why you feel it's important to maybe work with someone's potential as not necessarily their experience.
I think especially for artists of color, we experience this a lot, where it feels like you can kind of get your foot in the door on something. Like you do a big project, you get your foot in the door, everyone's celebratory. And then it's like when that project's over, instead of you being in the room and being able to proceed in the room, it's like you're kicked back outside the door. And then it's like, okay, what else you got? Or what else have you done? Also, just in terms of hiring, what we've noticed is that a lot of artists of color are hired specifically for what they have accomplished and not their potential, meaning that you can look at an artist's portfolio, you can know that they're good, but they're like, well, what projects have they worked on? What have they done? And if you do that enough times, you're not ever giving them the opportunity to show what they can actually do. And by the time they are able to do that, they're kind of burned out and bitter. And like, it's a whole process, right? That's just kind of the life of like an artist of color in a nutshell, to a degree. Generalizing that. But I think that what we've decided is that we have the opportunity to actually flip that around. So there are many artists of color that we know that have never given an opportunity. We give them the opportunity to shine, and we hire them based on knowing. It's like, you don't have to have, this is one thing that we always laugh about just for artists in general, is that you'll have this really great portfolio and you'll show it to someone. And they're like, oh, your portfolio is so amazing, and I can tell that you can draw and paint, but can you paint a clown? Like because you don't have a clown in your portfolio, they act like you're not capable of doing it. So it's the same thing, but on like with artists of color, it becomes like just this overbearing thing on your entire portfolio or your entire career, where they're like, well, you've never worked on a big movie, can you do that? And it's just like, well, will you give me the opportunity to do it? Like, it's that type of deal. So we really just strived to turn that around on its head.
Excellent. Okay, so like when an artist is applying to work for you, does it go through both Mike and you, or do you have a hiring system set in place? How does that work as far as for them to get their foot in that door?
I'm going to pass this one to Mike.
Yeah, so we do have someone who's in charge of that. But then, of course, it goes to me and Phil. And we also think about, like, where could we place them? Like, how could we, actually utilize them for their strengths? Because one of the things that, like, is kind of rough in the industry is, like, most of the time they won't give you a chance, right? Like, simply, they just give you a chance. For us, we at least say we don't want them to fail. So we don't want to set them up to fail either. So we think about it per project a lot of the times. Like we'll see someone's work and we say, okay, like they look like they'd be great for this and this project or this type of work in the future. And then we try and give them a chance to like actually prove themselves and like, you know, get up to those expectations. And they usually do.
Well, one of the things also I love, and I've seen it recently in social media, is that when one of your artists does something, you have no problem putting it out there and saying, yeah, they did a great job on this, whatever, which I think is kind of important, you know, as you say, just to realize, because the worst thing you can have when you work for somebody is for them not to acknowledge what you do.
Correct. We are artists through and through, and we've been through this, which is why we try with our company to make sure that we're doing it correctly and making sure that people feel seen and appreciated. One of the things that I told Mike, and it's something that I've kind of started to talk about, was when I was on the show, The Talk, right when they introduced me, the audience stood up and gave, you know, Akbar stood up and gave me a standing ovation, right? Now, in that moment, even though it's fast, is like the part that made me want to break down is not the fact that I felt seen. It was because I felt like concept artists were being seen all over the world. Like where if people didn't know what that job was, it felt like you were able to be seen. And also to a degree, it felt like a celebration of the work that, you know, I have accomplished as opposed to being behind someone all the time or being hidden. So it was like a two-part thing. So we definitely want to make sure that the artists that work for us feel that exact same way and that they are celebrated because you know, being an artist is hard. So it's like you should be celebrated and given credit for the work that you do.
Okay. So this is kind of a rhetorical question, and it's for the both of you. Do you see a point, you know, as the 9B Collective continues to grow, where you would get to the point where you would yourself would not do the drawings and you'd let your artists you've hired do it, or is that too much ingrained in your DNA to ever stop creating?
I feel like it's kind of happening now where we don't even draw that much anymore. It's like passing it to everyone else. So I think like just on the managerial side, it's really tough to like switch brains like all the time. Like, and the more and more we do it, the more tiring it gets. But also we want to make sure that we give everyone else opportunity because I feel like we've been really blessed to even have the opportunities that we've gotten, but we want to make sure that we're spreading the wealth for sure.
Correct. It's more about giving the opportunity. And then I know I'm old and tired. So I'm like, if I can art direct and pass it off, I'm completely fine to do that. These young kids are super talented and really good, you know, so it's like it's good to be able to share the wealth and give people an opportunity, because that's the other thing is it's a pipeline, right? It's one of those things where it's like you go through, you change, you grow, you move into stuff, and younger artists really need a chance to shine and use that energy in a positive direction and actually be able to work on stuff that they're excited about. You know, I want them to be able to, some product or some project that they watch when they're a kid, it's so exciting to get to work on that thing when you're older and be able to, you know, institute stuff into it or add to it, right? And that feeling should be shared. It shouldn't just be singular.
Excellent. Okay, so let's fast forward 15, 20 years, and the 9B Collective is still setting the standard for visual conceptual art. When it is all said and done, how would you want the 9B Collective to be remembered? By the work that you put out, or by the fact that you provided opportunities for young artists, maybe of color, who would not have gotten the opportunity otherwise?
Mike, you want to talk?
I definitely think it's more the latter, at least for myself. I want to speak for myself. It's the latter for me. I think like it's kind of a dream to see like all the opportunities that would happen and like how that would eventually change the playing field. And being a part of that rather than like the ego stroke of like seeing like all the cool things that we've done over time. It's like, I think to an extent, like you never really get, at least, I mean, maybe Phil knows better than me because he's worked like literally double the time I've worked in the industry. But to me, I'm like, I don't know if you ever get that like approval of like being excited or happy about all the things that you worked on. But I do get excitement and like happiness based on all the people I've helped. Yeah. So I think that that's more of like the moment for me that will like really make me feel great about it when I look back.
I agree with what Mike is saying, because it's an empty goal to continue to feed your own ego or to feed the things that you've done. The best feeling is when you know that you've helped other people. I've always said that what I think the legacy for 9B that I'd love to leave behind is eventually having the industry be at a state into where 9B doesn't have to exist. So a company like 9B that's trying to provide opportunity for artists of color and beyond shouldn't necessarily need to exist. It should just be happening, and it should just be equal, and it should be fair, and it should be balanced. And right now it's not. So the goal would be eventually to have it be where it's balanced enough to where that's not a needed thing. And then 9B would move on to transition into doing our own projects or developing things and helping more people and helping artists actually feel like there's a place for them to belong. That's the goal.
All right, excellent. Okay, well, I do want to thank you both for your time. And Phillip, I have to, like I said, I think I told you before, I had to admit, when I reached out to you on LinkedIn, I really did not think you would answer me. I put it out there just thinking, and then when you answered me, I was pleasantly surprised, but also kind of touched me. That I thought that, and I think it's a kind of a lesson for other maybe young people. You will never find anything out unless you take the time to ask.
Correct.
And so I thank you for that. Now, before I let you go, I want to give you guys a chance to maybe talk about any other projects you have in the work. I know you got a Blue Beetle movie coming out soon, and you're also working with Lightbox Expo on their second annual Easter egg paint-a-thon thing. So if you want to talk about any of that, I give you the floor.
Yeah, Mike, you want to give some plugs?
I'm trying to think of like what we can talk about.
Yeah, no, like there's a lot of NDA things, which is like, I'll say yes. We did get a chance to work on Blue Beetle, the live action Blue Beetle that directed by Angel Manuel Soto. That comes out, I think, in August of this year. So that was a really fun one for us to work on. And what we were able to provide there was kind of this in-between place between the departments, where we had kind of a hub of concept art that was being provided by a team that was primarily Latin, to add diversity, to add a diverse voice, but also to empower those artists to have a voice and a say in a project of telling a story that was very based in their culture. So that was that was a great project for us to work on. And yes, and then with Lightbox, we're doing the Easter egg event on was it April 1st?
Yep.
Yes.
First and second. Yep.
First and second. It's a 24-hour like draw and paint as much as you can. We'd encourage everybody to either go to lightboxexpo.com or Schoolism. Schoolism, I think, also .com has it. And sign up for it on the Discord and let it fly. It's going to be a fun event. It's superhero themed, so it should be a good time.
All right. Well, again, I appreciate you guys for your time, and we will be following the 9B very closely, and hopefully get a chance to talk to you again in the future as other projects come up. So I thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
All righty.
Thank you for watching this edition of GVN Talking Comics Interview. GVN Talking Comics is a production of Geek Vibes Nation.